How many steps before I step in a huge puddle?
It's don't fall in the hole. Sorry, Ferg. Okay, I'm just pushing Ferg into a hole. It wasn't me.
Okay, so hi, Ferg here, and a happy new year-ish to everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of Scout in the Woods. A little bit of a wait on this one since before Christmas, but this project has a long way to go. I'm happy to say I survived Donna's vaguely apologetic attempt on my life there in our mid-December walk, as you'll have just heard. And so Entwistle Reservoir near Bolton is the next setting on this podcast journey to better understand fringe experiences and extrasensory phenomena. I personally think that these edge phenomena can give us insights into the nature of reality, consciousness, and meaning more generally. And I'd speculate a relationship, for example, between whatever it is that gives us our experience and this same shape or narrative arc that we see in every single story that we come across, whether that's on screen, on the page, or even in our own lives. By this I mean in all stories we have a protagonist who encounters a challenge and travels away from home in some way, or into the woods as it were, where they learn something critical in their attempt to evolve and protect home in a new status quo, all bound by some limits of time and space. And actually, it was through thinking about this arc that we see in every story and its potential relationship with the nature of consciousness itself that gripped me and led me down the path to this project, long before I took a deeper interest in fringe phenomena. So that's one for another day. But to recap, for Scout in the Woods, I've been speaking both to experts in the latest studies of consciousness and to our guests in other episodes, ordinary folk like you or me, I've had the pleasure of meeting and from whom we've been hearing direct accounts of extraordinary unexplained phenomena. And by the way, please do email in to ferg@scoutinthewoods.com if you'd like to connect about a strange experience that you or someone you know has had, however positive or unsettling. So what follows is the second part of some fascinating chats I've been having with Dr. Donna Thomas from the University of Central Lancashire, who it's fair to say falls into both of these categories, i.e. both expert and experiencer. Donna has had a distinguished career in academia, addressing health, social care and educational challenges from research roles in the social sciences, and all of that even before she started researching unexplained experiences in the lives of children over the last several years. Donna has had some extraordinary experiences herself as a result of near-fatal events as a child, as well as a notable event more recently as an adult, actually at Entwistle Reservoir itself, all of which she delves into during our walk around the lake. So without further ado, let's pick up the conversation from December with Donna as she explains why we'd arranged to meet in the first place at Entwistle Reservoir. It's going to be thanks for the music and the songs we're singing. El Scotty in the woods, Dixon Rabbit Town, Supernova stained glass bowl, showing Sharon on the river of Styx with his pockets full of colour for the pilgrims of love. For the music and the songs we're singing, El Scotty in the woods. So, more ramshackle, I think, is than some of your other public performances.
This is perfect. Look at this view.
The gentleman that you mentioned you'd proposed Entwistle Reservoir here as a meeting spot.
Yeah, it's special because I take my own children here and our dog, our puppy. It's just so peaceful. I think anywhere in nature though is it's just the place to be. It's fabulous. But I used to come here with a really good friend of mine called Zach. He actually had a near-death experience. I think he got very sick as a child and vividly remembered his near-death experience where he was just moving through these places of light and kind of spiral-like structures. And then, sadly, as he got older, he developed leukemia and he had another near-death experience then. He had an incredible experience. The features of a typical NDE, so seeing the light and engaging with particular beings, but also a real transformative experience of being one with the universe. So, but he always felt himself, in the similar ways that I've just talked about, expanding and feeling much more than a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
He would, describe feeling in a very similar way, that he wasn't just Zach, he was the whole universe, he was everything. After that, he got better, but he was a real transformed person. So full of knowledge and wisdom, and really helpful to lots of different people. He was a really, really wonderful guy. So actually, Steve Taylor, who is a researcher in transformative experiences and transcendental experiences and awakening experiences, really, he interviewed Zach. And we used to come here a lot, and a couple of years ago, sadly again, his leukemia came back, and as he was kind of drawing near to the end, I had a huge impulse to come here. It was on a Monday morning, and normally I would never come here on a Monday morning because it's start of the week, it's school, it's work, it's all those kinds of things, but it was really overwhelming. So I followed the impulse and I came and I sat. And, I could just all of a sudden feel him everywhere, really feel his presence, but, not just next to me on the bench, but in the water and in the trees. And it was just beautiful, like an all-encompassing feeling of Zach, sense of Zach. And then a couple of minutes later, my phone pinged and I had the message that he'd just passed away. So this place, it's stunning, but it has real significance. But I think anyone would come, and they'd come here and they'd just love it. It's very healing, it's lovely.
What I wanted to ask about it, just a technical thing, is when you said that earlier that you felt Zach in everything, in the water, for example.
Yeah.
It's not like you were waddling around in the lake, right? No. And people were watching this lady kind of like,
no,
is
not
she
at
right?
all.
Like, what do you mean by
I didn't do it that day, no.
And this is where you can relate to other people's experience, and perhaps I can't, because I haven't ever experienced anything transcendental like that.
But that's the issue, is that when you have an experience that is transcendental, and transcendental means to go above duality in a way, above the opposites, above things in the world, well, not above, but just beyond in some way. I mean, it's a bit directionless in a sense, but it's taking you out and away from that duality, where you are experiencing no separation between who you feel yourself to be and everything that's outside of that self that you feel yourself to be. So for me, Donna, and that distinction collapses in a way. And that was a new experience for me that I've just described with Zach. So again, language is dual. So when we use language, we have a subject and an object. So when we use language, we're immediately creating distance between things. But again, so trying to describe these kinds of experiences using language, it's very challenging. You can't capture the essence of the experience, and I think this is the important thing. So someone who's had that experience will say, it's okay, you don't need to talk about that, I get it. I understand that without you putting it into words. And this is why research can be really difficult sometimes with children who are also trying to describe these kinds of experiences, whether it's through an NDE, whether they were out in nature. I mean, we have reports of older children and young people out in nature who all of a sudden have had some kind of what we would call this dissolution experience, where their typical sense of self dissolves, and then they feel that they are the tree and they are the water and they are the sky, as well as being who they are. And it's a beautiful experience for them. But again, how do they integrate that into a world that isn't shaped like that in any way? It's a world of opposites. It's sadly a world of competition. It's a world of control, where even a school is an extremely controlling environment. Children are not allowed to think critically or ask big metaphysical questions or children are taught this is how the world is, and that's that, and this is wrong and this is right. So that integration is really important for children and young people.
I did kind of want to get a sense of how much you're happy to talk about your own experiences,
Yes,
and
of
also,
course, yeah.
you know, your own thoughts, because
Yeah.
being an academic within this area, I mean, I suppose when you're in UCLan mode, you're and you know, qualitative research mode.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's slightly different to how you might be
Yeah.
happy to share more today and stuff.
So
But,
I think So as a researcher who studies experiences that we would consider are extrasensory, so these are experiences that go outside our typical understanding of being a person in the world, time, space. So they're not your everyday experiences, and of course there's different words for these, like exceptional or anomalous. And there's a range of these kinds of experiences, so it can range from near-death experiences, premonitions, out-of-body experiences, and engaging with deceased loved ones. You know, there's many. So, you know, I research these with children, of course, mainly, but also families as well now as the work's progressing. And of course you do not want to impose your own agendas and, you know, your own worldviews on what people are saying.
Yeah.
So in a way it's you're trying to achieve, in a sense, a type of objectivity. But on the flip side of that, I think if you've had an experience, I'm happy to share mine, but if you have had a significant experience, I think as a researcher, it's really helpful then for you to spot really subtle things or clues, you know, things that children say. In terms of my own experience, I had a very similar experience to the ones that I research with children, and it was a very transformative experience for myself, and one I think that guides the work that I do. So when I was 15, I accepted a lift home from a friend, another teenager who had a new car. So he was showing off, you know, driving really fast, and he actually lost control of the car, and it was going very, very fast. It was like over 100 miles an hour. The car had already set on fire because he was going really fast.
Yeah.
And then it started to turn over several times, so flipping upside down. Eventually it smashed into a wall. That's what brought it to a halt, and the car was upside down and on fire, and we were all trapped inside, so we couldn't get out. So that's what it must have looked like from the outside, but inside I'd had quite a different experience. So as the car started to turn, I felt this intense, incredible terror, and then the thought just came, this is it, I'm going to die. And as soon as that thought came, I experienced myself as no longer in the car disappeared, and I'm not sure where I was kind of nowhere and everywhere, and I was everything all at the same time. So that sense of who I was no longer a 15-year-old girl. You know, I felt myself to be everything. And with that was this incredible sense of love. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that love, it feels like a bit of a redundant word compared to this state or this feeling. It has the flavour of love, but it's so much more. It was so peaceful, but it felt home. I felt like I'd gone home, and that was really interesting feeling for me, because I didn't really have a home at 15, because I was from a very dysfunctional family. One of my parents was an addict, so I didn't have a stable home life, and I'd never really had that real feeling of safety and security. But in that moment I was home. And then I started to have what researchers might call a life review. Time didn't exist. Like, there was no sense of time with this. But in that review, I could just see and feel, not just see, it was actually like you were there, but you were witnessing it at the same time. So every moment, every nuance, every single thing, in that 15 years. And it was just appearing it was like a blank canvas in a sense, but it was just appearing. And it was kind of a panoramic, so it was moving like this. And then suddenly I found myself back in the car, in my body maybe. And, you know, still trapped, in terror again, realising that I'm in a trapped car and it's upside down. And then the next thing I remember was someone breaking a window somewhere, and, you know, and I got pulled out of the car, and then the whole thing blew up. So that was my own experience. Physically, I was okay. I only had a few, like a broken nose and a few minor things, really, compared to what could have happened. But
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
You weren't severely injured from the car roll?
I wasn't severely injured. I mean, I had some injuries, but compared to serious injury, I mean, one of the passengers was seriously injured. I was quite fortunate in that way. So very lucky, you know, very fortunate. But I went to hospital, had tests, had scans and these kinds of things, found myself at home, and I was just in this complete state of bliss. That's the only way I can describe it, for about 2 weeks, not really understanding.
Really? Yeah.
I loved everybody. I mean, as a 15-year-old, like, there was people I really didn't like. I was in this blissful state where I just loved everybody. Everything was, the whole world. I mean, and again, you know, I'm from a very broken family, but everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. The whole world just looked perfect. And I didn't really understand why. And I was actually in bed for 2 weeks, so I was kind of injured and hurt, but again, not seriously. Hello.
Hello, Maisie.
Oh, hello. Oh, oh, why would we?
That's Maisie.
That is Maisie.
Well, that Maisie 3 times. She has to be told 3 times to shut up. And even that doesn't work.
Yeah, they're really nice. Have a nice one. Amazing that you had this kind of 2-week period where you're you're kind of high on the love and vibe, and then it wears off, or like what happened?
Well, I think what happened was school, and having to go back into school again and integrate, knowing that you are far more than this girl.
Yeah.
You know, you are far more than this body. Mm-hmm. But then you're in a space where you're told the opposite. And of course, children and young people don't have a lot of power in contexts around adults, whether it's school or even in the home, because there's always a power dynamic between children and young people and adults. So it's very challenging. Because I was only 15, of course, I'd never really heard of a near-death experience anyway. I was from a secular family, and my dad was really interested in UFOs and things, and I think he had books lying around, but as a teenager, well, I didn't take much notice in all of that. I just thought, yeah, okay, whatever. And that's a very difficult experience to integrate back into a society that A, would tell you that's not possible,
You're nuts.
That's not true, you've banged your head. You know, there's all these different kinds of reasons. And that's, you know, obviously adults don't really know what to do with them. We don't have the language or the narrative or the understanding. So things can be diagnosed very quickly, as they were for me. Oh, it's dissociation, because every time I went out after I was trying to integrate, I would start to expand again. So I'd start to feel like I was merging with the sky, for example.
That's fascinating. For how long? Like, is this just something that comes and goes throughout your life, or just
back then? I manage it in different ways now, but back then, it was just a process that was happening through me or to me, and I didn't understand what it was. And then the adults around me are saying, "Well, there's something wrong with you. You know, this is PTSD. This is dissociation. This is something wrong with you." But I knew that it was much more than that. But when a young person or a child is told often enough that they're wrong, they then start to believe that. And then as a consequence, you know, you can go through life where everything's really difficult. You also feel isolated because you start to feel a lot different than other children. because you see, it's not about yourself even being validated, it's about your experience being validated.
Yeah.
So someone telling you that that's not real,
Yeah.
or that's not happened, and of course that has consequences for, how you feel about yourself naturally.
Yeah. It must have been bewildering for you, and but to come back into the classroom and study maths, geography, or whatever.
Yeah.
When in your day-to-day life, that you're experiencing, a loss of subjectivity, if you like, or a breakthrough of subjectivity into something more,
to a larger
universally
subjectivity. Yeah.
That's happening,
Yeah.
and people are saying that, or you haven't. Did you have anybody to confide in that really bought into this, or
no? Because I was from
long?
a very messy family, of course. My dad worked away an awful lot, and my mum was an addict, and no. And of course, I'm quite old now, and back in the 80s and things, we didn't have internet, we didn't have all the information now that anyone can get really at the click of a fingers, including young people and children. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. So I research with children who describe very similar kinds of experiences, but they kind of emerge in all different circumstances. So it could be that there's stress, or there's some kind of struggle, or there's an accident or illness, all kinds of reasons why children might have, and young people, especially young people, might have this kind of transcendental experience. If you have come outside of who you think you are, to the degree that you have a very different sense of self, but one that you feel is connected or is everything, like there was no distinction in that moment for me, and children also try to describe this, and it's very, very difficult even for adults to describe. I think that's when going back to the subtleties, that if you've had an experience like that, you can quickly recognise when a child or a young person is trying to describe a similar state of being, in a sense that they've completely come out of this small sense of self, and they have experienced being one with everything. There's something, we're learning at the minute about, is it really common for children and young people to have more of these experiences? When we're adults, we kind of, if we're thinking about ego, if we're thinking about ourself and our conditioned self, we have layers and layers of conditioning, as we get older, whereas younger children especially, they don't necessarily have that. And I think this is why some of this research is really important, because it is about raising awareness that children and young people, and we're not just talking about these transcendental experiences, but also have a range of extrasensory experiences that would be seen as weird or not possible, such as, we have reports of children who talk to their deceased grandparents a couple of days after their funeral, and there's so much activity going on. But in the sciences, especially in social sciences, and these are the sciences that do inform how society functions, they inform policy and service delivery. We never look at these kinds of experiences. We don't look at the full spectrum of human experience. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, in this area, and
I mean, I'd love to see some Pew Centre research or something like this that just shows just how many people have experienced anomalous. I don't know if you've come across statistics about, whether because there's a whole panoply of things that happen, not just NDEs or like fear-death experiences where people haven't, and we try and put them in boxes and categorise them because it helps. But effectively, they seem to be all part of a wider picture of things that people are experiencing. But
hello.
They say hello.
Oh.
another dog raid.
Oh, cutie pies. Hello. Yes. I think you said something. So it's this.
They all interconnect. They're all this stuff. I mean, I shouldn't say that because that's an assumption, right? But we have a tendency to view things kind of atomistically, with our current
Yeah.
paradigm, if you like, and
Yeah.
the way we interpret the world. Yeah, all of this stuff kind of seems to me like it interrelates. And even when folk are talking about a spirit that they've seen, you know, slightly less apologetically than we might have done 10, 20 years ago, because there's a little bit more out there, or like their life flashing before them, or my pal told me about when he rolled his car and he was wrapped up in a ball of light.
Sorry, thank you.
That's going to sound weird.
Yeah.
So
That guy was looking at you really weird then.
See,
Yeah.
this is it, isn't it? Like you even now,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel emboldened to talk about this stuff way more than I did a year ago. Obviously, I'm doing it as a podcast,
Yeah.
right? But people still look at them as kind of like discrete things, discrete phenomena.
Yes.
They're all interrelated
Yes.
as far as I can see.
Yeah,
What do you
I
think,
agree. Yeah. So for me, you know, you mentioned as well a distressing near-death experience in your little monologue. Then I caught
Thank
that
you.
bit. I think we asked the wrong question.
Yeah.
So we're always asking, when we look at NDEs, we might be asking, well, what happens when we die? That's always the question. And of course, you know, it's not even just a question in near-death research.
Mm-hmm.
It's a philosophical question. It's a human question. You know, what happens when we die? If we asked instead, what are we? That leads us to questions about the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And I think if we have more knowledge about that, questions such as what happens when we die might become redundant, because we'd have a better understanding. So if we think about consciousness before matter, and that from my experiences as well, we might be far more than this. Yeah. And we know very little about what we are, or the extent of what we are.
Yeah.
It could be that, so when we say what happens when we die, well, a part of us may already be there in that state of being, if that makes sense. So if consciousness is first, why do we think that there's different places? Why is it not different states of consciousness rather than... And if we think about things like psychedelic research, that's saying similar things. It's always thinking about we move into a state of consciousness that allows us to have a particular experience.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
For
So
sure. And
if we're layered and
Yeah.
we're transpersonal, and then we're something beyond the transpersonal, does it not then make sense that we're already there?
Yeah.
So that if we ask what are we, we're kind of answering, well, what happens when this dies, in a sense.
Yeah.
Does that? I've completely
It
blurted
makes
on there.
way more sense than to me in terms of how I see things than like it might feel when you're explaining something like that. And I think when the further a concept is outside of the physicalist, you know, assumptions that we kind of conditioned to have, I guess, the more apologetic we might be about trying to put it forward, and yet there's enough now to I mean, even veridical out-of-body experiences in near death. There's so many striking things that should just be a penny drop moment for more. You think it should cut through. So it's amazing sociologically that doesn't. But time and space dissolving, like in so many of these experiences. So why would it be so crazy to think that that there is, you know, much more to this, or that perhaps we're here but we're not here, we're somewhere else as well. Wherever. I mean, if you're to take it, and I can't see why we wouldn't take more of what people come back reporting from these experiences at face value, because that's exactly what they are, authentic experiences, as long as folk are, you know, speaking honestly and trying to relate as well as they can what they understood, what they experienced. If people are coming back saying we're one, you know, well, why wouldn't we want to take analytic idealism a little bit more seriously than materialism as something that completely incorporates that concept? You know, you know, maybe might not be ultimately what people think in 100 years, 200 years, because things seem to evolve and like reality seems to evolve. But yeah, why not? Why are we deaf to it? When and why are we deaf as well? I mean, I completely share this around qualitative research. Why are we deaf to what the amazing things that people are reporting that's so widely impactful? I feel like I'm being interviewed now. I think I'm going to let that tail off because, like, I think I'm basically made the point. But
I hear you. Yeah. I think from what I, got from that is that there's a lot of evidence building across different disciplines as well. So not just social sciences now, but in neuroscience, in psychedelic studies, in the field of parapsychology, there's all this data and there's all this evidence that it isn't being utilised in a sense to shape and transform the world and systems and this kind of thing. But also, if we think about, it comes down to experience as well. So what is subjective experience? Because you said something about how can we know that someone's telling the truth.
Yeah.
But for them, it is their subjective reality.
Yeah.
So we place value as well. We make value judgments on whether, if this isn't a shared experience, it can't. We don't know if it's true. So it's changing the parameters in a sense, and it's starting to value as well in science different kinds of knowledges. If we're asking questions about, is that real because you've just reported it and I'm not sure it's real, then that's when we start to ask ontological questions. Well, what do we mean by real?
Yeah.
What do we mean by reality? What do we mean by it's subjective?
Yeah.
And then what do we mean by objective? And is anything truly objective? And it can lead to all these then, I guess, philosophical questions as well as research questions.
Yeah.
But I think it is connected. It's showing that maybe research around time is connected to experience, because, how do we experience time? Is time a construct of language, for example? Because when we use language, we're constructing a sense of time in a way, or is it more than that, or does it not exist at all? But it's always linked to experience. Everything seems to always be linked to experience.
Okay, so Ferg here, just jumping in quickly for anyone new to Bernardo Kastrup's theory of analytic idealism. In short, this theory challenges the dominant materialist belief that consciousness arose purely as a survival trait from lifeless matter over billions of years of evolution, and that it's created as such by the brain. Instead, analytic idealism suggests consciousness is fundamental, not just a product of neurons, and the theory draws on phenomena like out-of-body experiences, shared dreams, savant abilities, past life memories in children, spiritual visions, so-called paranormal activity, meditative states, and much, much more. Kastrup proposes that our sense of being a waking individual in this physical space-time that we know as Earth stems from what he would call dissociation, i.e., we normally experience and perceive each other as separate selves, but we really belong to an underlying unified field of consciousness which extends beyond space and time, and which we normally forget in order to fulfill our lives here. And Donna's experience of oneness during a traumatic car crash, for instance, reflects this concept. So, analytic idealism is a leading theory currently which invites us to consider that our reality might extend beyond what we typically perceive from birth to death, and urges scientific exploration of these extraordinary experiences like Donna's, in order for us to really advance our understanding of what we are and what we're doing here. So with that, back to the conversation with Donna by the lake.
I think I listened to one bit of online commentary on it recently, which they were suggesting that you got it all right. It's just like consciousness is primary rather than, hasn't emerged from physics, biology, and then it's kind of emerged. If you just, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to throw anything out. Actually, you just it's metaphysics, it's philosophy, but to me it matters in a big way. A, because people are experiencing this stuff, and in some cases it's quite traumatic or in most cases I would suggest, like in your case, wasn't very necessarily, a lot of elements of that weren't particularly helpful, right? In other ways they have. I mean, they've kind of spurred you on, I guess, to have the life that you have and to follow the journey you have. But
you made me think about something else as well, because We're talking about post-materialism and we're talking about experience, but matter does matter as well, in a sense of when we're experiencing matter, in a sense, it's the way that we experience this world and navigate this world.
Yeah.
But what we need to ask though is, what is matter as well? Because again, when we think about matter and biology, it's always from that physicalist perspective. And that everything emerges from that. Consciousness emerges from that. Our sense of self emerges from that.
Yeah.
When it might actually be the other way around. But, matter it's another mystery in a way, because we're having this experience, this tangible experience of it. But is matter what we think it is? Is it just an expression of consciousness again, that kind of allows us to have this experience of separation, of knowing the other, of learning from or about the other?
I mean, I've read a bit of Carlo Rovelli recently, who kind of breaks down quantum theory to a level that I can actually engage with. but for what I took from it, we could perhaps reimagine the way we think about matter in terms of relationships, and more perhaps processes as a way to start thinking about it a little bit differently.
I think that there might be a suggestion there that that's the kind of the bottom layer of reality, is the processes and the relationality, and
for him.
But I suspect, and this is what analytical idealism, you mentioned it earlier, I think, there is something beyond that, which is consciousness, which is, a field of subjectivity, or the field, the one subject, the one field of subjectivity that, we're an aspect of.
Yeah.
And for me, that makes so much sense. I think, you talked earlier about how do we reconcile and bring these things together. I think that's kind of one philosophical approach that has the power to do that. But that's just my view. I mean, and of course, there's so much work coming up now around, post-materialist scholarship, if you like.
Yeah.
But I do land on this one, because from my reading, even from my intuition, from what children tell me, from their philosophical insights, that's where I land. I think that carries the most explanatory power.
Well, I mean, when everybody started to forgive Galileo and say, sorry, we jailed you, pal, maybe we shouldn't have, because I can see now it's slightly curvy. When you have a shared, a collective kind of consciousness change, it's triggered by stuff like that. And surely, the fact that people are experiencing what you've experienced, what Bernardo Kastrup experienced, because he saw a UFO fly past him when he was 9 years old in his back garden. I mean, it's not. It doesn't strike me as any coincidence that your two, academics coming to prominence who've had these experiences, and also, been humble about them.
I think lots of scientists and academics and people also have these kinds of experiences, but it might just be that they're dealt with or in a different way. So for one person, they might just completely push it aside and don't do anything with it, and then get caught up in whatever. And of course, that's their choice, that's their volition to do that.
Yeah.
And then for some of us, it can have such a tangible impact, and maybe combined with other life circumstances. So, for me, my traumatic childhood and all these kinds of things that, again, lots of people have. Maybe it's kind of more, a complex thing that's going on, sets of experiences and circumstances that might steer the influence of that experience in a particular way.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is because I think that we all have these experiences. I think if you are a human being, you will have some kind of extrasensory experiences, because I think we're extrasensory beings. I think that's, and again, when I was talking earlier about perhaps we're already there, or an aspect of us, whether it's that transpersonal aspect of self or something even beyond that, an aspect of us is already there. and maybe that's where that intuition, is coming from.
Oh, I mean, I quite like to be on Other Worlds, this podcast
Yeah.
I told you about, where people have time slips and all sorts.
Yeah,
but maybe not today. So, and that by the way, that like reaching popular culture and being a top 200 podcast, it might not be on many academics' radar, but like,
Which one is that?
it's called the Other World podcast, Other World. It's been going 2.5 years. It's kind of like, I mean, Jack Wagner's kind of my hero. Like, I would be the. I mean, if we are one experiencer, then I'll take some solace from that. In that,
we'll have a piece of that. Thank
Jonathan Safran too. I'll have a piece of Jonathan.
Yeah.
But I think I was going to say, so like if you take at face value some of these experiences, and of course. Most people still will probably tend to view it through funky imagination, brain does weird things.
Yes.
And there seems to be these patterns, but go heck, like, hey, whatever. That's interesting, but weird. We're never gonna know. It doesn't matter if you frame it like that and still see the patterns and talk about, I don't know, witches and spirits and whatever else. Or if you say, well, hang about, this is a more fundamental reality, the fact that we're a soul family in the next layer, if you like, that we
so it's like we're taking constructs and concepts from what is essentially kind of a discursively made social reality, and then placing it onto how we might describe certain experiences beyond the body, or certain relationships that we have with each other. And I think, I mean, coming back to near-death experiences, it's interesting how lots of adults will describe lots of kinds of phenomena during their near-death experience, but can be quite particular about, different religious icons, for example, like meeting Jesus, or sorry, not icons, but figures, or whoever it is, and it can be quite. Culturally conditioned might be the word, where in some of my own research with children who we speak to literally 2 to 3 weeks after they've had not a near-death, a death experience, and then being resuscitated, where children's, I mean, this is only a small study, but there is some other research that can show some of the subtle differences between children and adults' near-death experiences. It doesn't seem as rich in cultural content. So, for example, children can describe this very dark, loving space. So, not a scary darkness at all, not a negative. This beautiful, loving, safe space that you could almost think that they were describing a womb, a mother's womb, for example. And they don't seem to carry or describe as many kind of features as an adult might. Some older children do, and in our study we have an example of one 12-year-old, so he's not quite a teenager, but visiting crystal cities, for example, or engaging with people around his bed who his parents can't see. So there's a lot of the same kind of phenomena across reports from adults and children, but children have these subtle, kind of transcendental even features that are really, really interesting. But going back to what you said, is it then that when we try to describe something like a soul journey or something, it could be that we're just using the constructs that we have, that we use to navigate the world and describe the world and be in the world and construct the world around us, especially the social world. It could be we're kind of layering it onto that so we can have some shared understanding of processes that we might not, and experiences we don't have language for. So we have to kind of compensate, I guess, in some way. And it's a beautiful thing, isn't it, to think of, it's such a nice thing to think about moving in soul groups. But is that a metaphor that really just shows the connections that we have anyway? Those transpersonal connections, those deeper connections.
I mean, there's obviously so much going on. The amount of people, the growing amount of people that seek out kind of transpersonal states in therapy of sort of different descriptions, whether that's drug induced or holotropic breath work, or like.
We know that we need more kind of interdisciplinary working and thinking across the different fields.
Yeah.
Because when we're trying to understand what it means to be human, it needs everybody. It needs all fields. You can't just, look at that through the lens of one discipline.
Yeah.
Or one science. You can't just look at it through neuroscience. You need all the sciences around that really important and mysterious question of what does it mean to be human. My really good friend and colleague Sarah Durston,
yes,
Professor Sarah Durston, she's a neuroscientist, and for Sarah, she was, she's been studying ADHD,
right,
and these kinds of neurodiversities with children, and she's, they've been looking for what they'd call a biological imprint in the brain, and they've not found it, and.
Right.
For Sarah, you go through this, okay. For Sarah, that led her then to, understanding that, well, maybe we actually need to speak to the so-called producers of consciousness, which are children. And and I just found her work fascinating. And of course, I'm keen to learn more about the neuroscientific perspective. And for Sarah, she was keen to learn more about the qualitative approach and involving people, because we don't tend to involve people an awful lot in research about consciousness and what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Funnily enough.
That's nuts when you're... I mean, especially when it comes to like fringe phenomena.
There's another layer to that as well, where this comes back to concepts as well. So, again, in research, in qualitative research, where we set research up in a way where people can tell their stories and narratives, but again, so experience is kind of filtered through concepts, and those concepts are highly conditioned by so many socio-cultural influences that we might not be getting the absolute truth about the experience, and we always have to to bear that in mind as well.
We're talking about causality there, aren't we?
Yeah.
What's causing them, and what are they?
But in qualitative research, I think, yes, we talk about this is that person's subjective experience or subjective reality, but what if 1,000 people have had that same experience?
Yeah.
So then it might give it a bit more validity in terms of this is something that actually happened, or so there's all different ways and issues and challenges around qualitative research and using people's stories in research. That it can be quite challenging as well. Yeah. And there's lots of different nuances and things that we have to think about, and arguments that we always have to make, because what you're talking about is something called experiential authority. So it's the authority of the person who's had the experience, and we see that as very valuable data. Legitimate data, but again can be questionable. We've got to always think about through what lens is that story being filtered, and ask that question: how much does it accurately represent a particular experience? So I've just been fortunate enough to get a very big research grant. So we do a lot of qualitative work with children, and there's so many reports of these telepathic moments and things like premonitions as well. So children will report that they know what their close carer is thinking. So there is definitely something around close bonds here between children and their carers as well. So the reason why we want to do these experiments is to kind of, we've got all this qualitative data, but wouldn't it be nice to have some kind of experimental data looking at, we'll have two groups. One will be neurotypical children and one will be neurodiverse children.
Right.
Because one of the questions I always get asked is, do you think that, neurodiverse children in your studies report more experiences? And they do.
And it just doesn't get...
They report more, a wider variety, so more kinds of phenomena than children who might be defined or experience the world rather as neurotypical. So, and we don't have enough data to say that for sure, but this is where we wanted to kind of bring in some experiments as well with this big grant that we've got. I think, was it Spinelli? I might be, again, fact check that name, but in the 70s there was a parapsychology researcher who, felt that, so if children were kind of lacking in one particular capacity, so the capacity to speak, the extrasensory skills or capacities might increase in another area. So if you can't verbally speak, would you be then more telepathic? Would something in kind of evolution or nature or something enhance that capacity? And he said the same for motor skills. So if children are lacking any kind of motor functions where they can't move, could that then connect more to those children being telekinetic, where they could move things with their mind? So it's a really interesting theory. So it's a theory about having a deficit in one area, but then having enhanced capacity in another area. But we'd see that capacity as extraordinary or supernormal. Or and again, this is something where, as part of this study, that we've actually got some great funding for, and I'm not allowed to say much about this yet, so I'm speaking like this. We will be researching these experiences in the context of human development, so across the life course, because it's about looking at those key transitional phases or circumstances or anything across the life course where we may have an increase or a decrease in these kinds of experiences. So it's a really exciting piece of research. But yes, I think that
and multidisciplinary as well. Sorry to butt in.
It's fine.
That is part of the funding on the basis that it's going to be different disciplines, whether that's neuroscience, I don't know, or is it qualitative?
I got the funding for the study, but we always have our studies as interdisciplinary as we can. So we have a team. So Sarah Durston will be advising on this study from neuroscience, and then we have Mark Whitman, who'll be acting as a consultant who is well versed in experimental studies. So it's kind of it's a team effort. And then Kirsty Allen will be working on this study as well. And Kirsty, Kirsty works as a research assistant to iCreates at UCLan, but she's really interested in children and sensitivities and maybe personality traits and these kinds of things, and how that might make a child or an adult even more sensitive. I think I'm bringing this in because I think that we either touched on this earlier or it was before
I've
we
chucked
started.
it at you at some point
in
so many emails. I'm just time. Is it 2? Is it 2:15? I'm so sorry.
Oh my word.
Okay, so that was about all we had time for in our lap round Entwistle Reservoir. I'm hoping to speak to Donna again. We didn't have time to discuss a lot of things, such as our shared interest in narrative structure and narrative theory. But a huge thanks to Donna for this conversation. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of these themes develop as the research continues. If anyone listening in would like to share a fringe experience they've personally had, or recommend a friend or family member with a story to tell, please contact Ferg at scoutinthewoods.com. That's FERG at scoutinthewoods.com. You can watch Scout in the Woods on YouTube or listen on your favourite podcast app. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your day, evening, night, etc.
All right, here we go.
River of Styx, with its pockets full of colour for the pilgrims of love, for the music and the songs we're singing now, Scotty in the Woods.
But then having to go back into school again and integrate, knowing that you are far more than this girl. You are far more than this body. But then you're in a space where you're told the opposite.